Hello lovely people, Thyworm here with a build guide for last Epoch patch 0.9.2, the Triggerclaw, where I'm only using 2 skills but triggering 3 more. Like most of my builds, it's mostly fun, not even necessarily good, although I'm doing empowered timelines very comfortably at this stage, which is good enough for me. This is a new character, I leveled it all the way to level 93, although I had something else in mind which didn't work, so I did a bit of a rework, and now this is where we are at. There are timestamps available, so let's dive in by looking at the pros and cons. Here are the pros. It is a fun build with tons of frost spells popping off. It's a one button build plus a movement ability. It's capable of both mapping and bossing, but it doesn't excel in any of the two. It doesn't require any uniques, although I am using a few. Then the cons? It's not very tanky. Once the enemies get damage modifiers in the Monolith, there's a decent chance you're gonna die. It's not a fast build, it's not slow, just average, but definitely not a speed mapper. Let's start with the build requirements. This build has no real requirements in terms of items you need. I will go over a few interesting uniques you could use. You can use the Bleeding Heart amulet, because the downside of bleed gets neglected by Frostclaw clans. The Twisted Heart of Ukairos is a great relic with amazing stats and health to ward conversion, but you can also get that conversion using other items, including the new experimental ones from rune ranges. I'm using Strands of Souls, just because I can honestly, but it does add a ton of ward, but once again, none of them are mandatory. Then the build philosophy. My build philosophy in general is just that I want to play fun builds. I don't start theory crafting up front, I just start with a simple idea, usually an item I want to use, and then I start leveling a character. In this case, I saw Frostclaw as the new ability and just wanted to try it out after botching a runic invocation build. And of course it's a Runemaster. This build specifically, I wanted it to be an easy to play fun build, and once I saw that Frostclaw can trigger both Elemental Nova and Ice Barrage, that's what I wanted to do. The whole idea is that you use one skill, Frostclaw, which costs no mana and does decent damage, to trigger 2 more damage abilities, and then our movement ability, Flame Rush, triggers Runic Invocation. Simple as that, but super fun to play. So what do you need in terms of stats? Here's the wish list. In terms of defenses, make sure you get rest capped of course, and ideally get 100% crit avoidance. The blessing in the Monolith can help a lot here too, as well as idols. Then we don't really scale health, but we use ward pretty much as soon as we get access to it, so around level 30 or so. That means you get ward on hit, ward generation, ward retention, all that stuff. Also intelligence helps here. Mana and mana regen are nice because those triggered spells cost a lot of mana, and we got some frailty on hit as well. In terms of offense, we are scaling cold damage, elemental damage, spell damage, crit chance and crit multiplier. Cold penetration is part of the build as well. Flat spell damage obviously helps a lot too. Let's look at the skill specialization and the skills that we're using. I will not discuss each point invested, but instead focus on the most important nodes. You can see everything in the build planner for yourself. Starting with Frostclaw. It is important we get the mana cost to 0. We do this by equipping a wand for -3, and then Frozen Rain for another -3, and then Gift of Winter for another -6. Then we make our way to both triggered spells, meaning Elemental Nova with Celestial Conflux and Power Word Hail for Ice Barrage. Round out the tree with Rending Cascade for that base crit chance, and take note of Bright Frost, as this cleanses any ailments on cast. This is amazing for an item like Bleeding Heart, negating the drawback, or Monolith Modifiers that apply ailments. Up next, Elemental Nova. Also here we make the skill as cheap as we can with Cryomantic Fragility. We go with the Cold Elemental Nova, of course, to leverage cold damage, and just pick half of the tree over there. It's quite a lot of damage, and take note of Shatter Nova, 30% more damage against a bunch of status ailments. If at all possible, get these ailments on your gear or idols. Frozen and Chilled will happen, but Shocked and Ignite you have to get somewhere else. I'm also taking Freezing Cascade, which is just a cool effect, a bunch of chaining damage across the entire packs, which looks cool. Then Ice Barrage. Normally this skill is a bit of a pain to self-cast, but a triggered version works beautifully in my opinion. The tree mostly specs into damage with sublimation in the top right, challenge the elements for rare and boss damage bottom right, and then we take the scenic route to cryogenesis, 80% more damage, ice shield, which is great for defenses. The cooldown of 4 seconds is actually fine because we don't have the mana to trigger ice barrage every second anyway, so this helps our build and doesn't hurt it. Ultimately, frost armor is just an amazing node, 60% more cold damage. We're all about cold damage, and this is a big one. For a movement skill, I went Flame Rush, primarily because it can trigger Runic Invocation by taking the Epilogue node. Make sure Runic Invocation is on your skill bar or this doesn't work. You make the skill cost less mana with Blazing Flux. Below that, Runic Eclipse is less damage taken, and then we turn the whole thing into an Ice Rush with 3 out of 3 Lunar Protection, energy equivalents, Snowballing for cold conversion, and finally Branding Cold. We top it off with Smolder and Burn shredding cold resistances. Finally, Runic Invocation. In this build, Runic Invocation is a support skill with a specific setup. This setup comes from Immutable Order, which will cast runes based on your skill bar. Make sure you have any cold skill, any fire skill, and then Flame Rush equipped on your skill bar, giving you a cold, fire and cold rune guaranteed. This rune combination, called Reowin's Frostguard, gives a bunch of ward, and we get it every time we use Flame Rush. The rest of the skill tree is sort of up to you, honestly. Mana is still a thing, so I take Attuned Approach and also Elementalist's Call for penetration on the next elemental spell. Inscribed Patterns provides some mana regen, and that's about it, honestly. Time to look at the passives. I've recorded, link below, the progression of the passives, so you can see that for yourself in the planner. I'll just pick out a few notes that I want to highlight. Arcanist is good for int and resistances. Mage Flurry is amazing for attack speed. Around level 95 you can max out Knowledge of Destruction too. In the Runemaster tree, you want as much mana regen as you can because this is a very mana hungry build. I'm also getting a bunch of bonuses like 7 out of 10 Quintessence of Triumph because we will have more ward than the target's remaining health, at least on regular enemies. 1 point in Runeword Cataclysm for 15% more damage against targets with 35% health or less. That's a good deal. Inscribed Instruments for the crit multi as we're doing a wand. 8 out of 8 Decree of the Burning Wind, 16% more damage against bosses and rares because we pretty much always have a Ra or Fire rune. 8 out of 8 Sanguine Runestones makes health regen apply to ward, which is really good. 1 point in Runeword Avalanche is enough for +6 spell cold damage, Jagged Veil for ward and crit multi, and Celestial Doom for flat spell damage and more damage against branded bosses, and we do have a brand from time to time using the Flame Rush. We also take 25 points in Sorcerer because we need Ice Barrage of course. The Wisdom node is great for more mana regen, and Chill to the Bone is cold penetration and leech, just excellent. Then, also very important, gear. I got decent gear, but nothing crazy I think. I already talked about the uniques and other ways to convert health to ward. The rest of the gear is just resistances, intelligence, some health, damage, and a crystal skull for that base crit. Using the catalyst, you can crit cap yourself rather easily, which you should aim for. You can also see all the gear, of course, in the planner that I'm wearing right now. For idols, there are new Ornate Glass idols with mana efficiency and penetration for Frostclaw. I got 2 of those, the rest is just defensive, capping resistances and some ward generation. For blessings, I'm taking mostly resistance blessings. I do however have the cold damage blessing, which ideally would be cold resistance shredding, but haven't found that yet. I have spell damage, leeched as health, quite useful to have somewhere in your build, and frailty on hit. 42% chance is more than enough. It's a great defensive blessing, and I also have crit avoidance. Loot filters. I normally create loot filters, but I didn't level this build from scratch with this in mind at least, meaning my loot filter is only for endgame and super strict. But you can create a loot filter from the build planner perhaps. Anyway, you know what you're looking for, it shouldn't be too hard to make one yourself or tweak the one you already have. Then the playstyle, here's the build in action. It's very easy really, just spam your 0 mana cost Frostclaw and everything else happens automatically. It is quite smooth, I think it looks amazing. I'm sure once again this isn't the most optimal min-maxed Frostclaw build out there, but it is one of the more enjoyable ones I think. Don't forget to use Flame Rush often for that extra ward, and you should be good to go with a steady 2 to 4k ward all the time. Talking about leveling for a bit, normally, like I said, I have a build in mind from the start, but this time I reworked my initial Runemaster into this. I can't say too much about leveling. Using Elemental Nova and Frostclaw, however, should be completely fine for leveling. Just make sure you get the mana reduction before you start triggering other spells, because there's no way you have enough mana otherwise. Let's talk some Monolith Modifiers. Don't give them crit avoidance and don't give enemies too much damage, honestly. This build is not super tanky, and with too many damage multipliers, enemies start cutting right through that 4k ward. We freeze most enemies, so stuff like Enrage and Frenzy is fine. Deadly is not, but I don't think Deadly is ever fine. Nodes you can definitely take are all nodes that apply ailments to you, like Chill, Slow, Marked for Death, etc. Those are all cleansed by the Frostclaw, so they're basically free nodes. And that's it guys, I spent a good chunk of time on these guides, which is why I don't release too many of them. If you appreciate the effort, consider liking or subscribing, it really helps me out. Thanks for watching, see you soon, love you all. Bye bye.